"I slept in your bed, rancher. Get ready, we're going to have a child," said the Apache fugitive. The rancher lived a quiet life at the edge of the frontier. His small ranch sat on a stretch of land where the rolling hills met the forest, and the wind carried the scent of pine and earth. Every morning, he would rise before the sun, tend to his cattle, and check the fences that stretched across the property. He liked the rhythm of his days, the predictability of his routine, and the solitude that allowed him to think without interruption. Life had been hard at times, yes, but he had learned to rely on himself, and that had given him a certain strength. One evening, as he walked along the perimeter of the ranch, inspecting the corral and the small barn, he noticed a shadow moving near the edge of the woods. At first he thought it was an animal, a deer or perhaps a coyote, but the shape moved differently, carefully, almost cautiously. He stopped, hand resting on the handle of his knife, and listened. There was a soft rustle of leaves, a muffled sigh, and then silence. Curiosity mixed with caution, he stepped closer, calling out softly, "Hello, is someone there?" For a long moment there was no answer. Then a figure emerged, a woman, thin and worn from travel, with hair dark as night and eyes that carried both fear and determination. Her clothes were torn and stained, evidence of a long and difficult journey. The rancher froze for a second, unsure what to do. He knew the dangers that came with harboring someone like her. Apache people were often hunted, and the tension between settlers and the tribes was high. But he could not ignore the sight of her, injured and vulnerable. Something in her eyes, a silent plea, made him hesitate. He lowered his hand from his knife and stepped closer slowly. "You're hurt," he said in a calm voice. "Come inside. You can rest." She looked at him with caution, as though unsure whether he would help or harm her. After a moment, she nodded slightly and allowed him to guide her toward the ranch house. The walk was slow. She stumbled once or twice, and he caught her, steadying her with gentle hands. By the time they reached the door, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Inside the small cabin, the rancher made a fire in the hearth. He fetched a bowl of water and some bread, offering it to her. She accepted it quietly, her hands trembling as she ate. He did not ask questions immediately, knowing that her trust had to come slowly. Instead, he tended to the fire, fed the animals, and prepared a place for her to rest. She watched him from the corner of the room, her eyes guarded but curious. There was a strength about him, a quiet confidence that came from years of living alone in a harsh land. She realized perhaps that he could be trusted. Over the next few days, the rancher and the woman established an uneasy routine. She helped with chores as best she could, fetching water, cleaning the small cabin, and tending to the animals. He found himself talking to her, telling her things he had never shared with anyone, stories of his childhood, memories of a family he had lost, and the reasons he had chosen a life of solitude. At first, she listened silently, her expression unreadable. But slowly she began to open up, sharing fragments of her own story. She spoke of the violence that had forced her to flee, of her family and her people, and the ambush that had left her alone and running. Despite the differences in their worlds, a bond began to form between them. It was not yet friendship, not yet trust in its fullest sense, but it was something fragile and real. The rancher admired her resilience, the way she endured pain without complaint, and her quiet courage. She, in turn, began to respect his honesty, his straightforward manner, and the steady rhythm of his life that seemed so different from the chaos she had known. The nights were the hardest. The rancher would lie in his bed and hear the sounds of the forest outside, the howl of wolves in the distance, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of night birds. And he would think of the woman, sleeping in the small cot he had set up near the fire. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken question about what would come next. He did not know if she would leave when it was safe, or if she would stay. And he did not know what it would mean if she did stay. One evening, As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, she came to him and said something that made his heart skip. She spoke of the future, of the uncertainty of the world outside, and of her reliance on him for safety. Her voice was quiet but firm, and there was an honesty in her words that could not be ignored. In that moment, the rancher realized that his life had changed forever. He could not turn away from her, not now, not when she had trusted him so completely. The days that followed were filled with small victories and quiet moments. She helped mend the fence, fed the chickens, and even managed to milk the few cows they had. They shared meals and stories, laughter sometimes slipping through despite the tension of the outside world. The rancher found himself looking forward to her company, listening for her voice, and noticing her absence when she went to gather firewood or fetch water. And she, in turn, began to rely on him, not just for safety but for companionship, for a sense of stability she had not known in months, perhaps years. Yet the danger outside never fully disappeared. Scouts from the town occasionally rode past, eyes scanning for signs of Apache presence. The rancher knew that hiding her was not a permanent solution. They would have to make choices, face the risks together, and confront the reality of a world that did not easily accept their unusual alliance. But for now, they had this moment, this fragile peace, and it was enough to sustain them. The rancher began to notice the small details about her, how she moved quietly through the cabin, how she observed the animals with a keen eye, how she spoke softly but with authority when giving instructions. And he began to feel something he had long denied, a protective instinct, a sense of care that went beyond mere hospitality. He realized that the quiet life he had cherished could no longer remain the same. The presence of the woman had brought not only uncertainty, but also a spark of life, a reason to hope for something more than survival. One night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, the rancher thought about what it meant to trust someone so completely. He had always relied on himself, on the rhythm of his work and the solitude of his land. But now he understood that life was larger than that connection, even with someone so different from him, could bring strength and purpose. And though he did not know what the future held, he felt ready to face it alongside her. By the time the first month had passed, the woman was no longer just a guest. She was part of the ranch, part of the rhythm of his life. The rancher had grown used to her presence, the soft sound of her voice in the morning, the way she moved among the animals, the careful attention she gave to every task. And he began to wonder, in quiet moments, what it would be like if she stayed forever, what it would mean to have someone to share the burdens and joys of life with. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. There were dangers outside the safety of the ranch, dangers in the town that might never accept her, and the constant uncertainty of the world around them. But for now, he had chosen to protect her, to offer shelter and care. And in doing so, he had discovered something unexpected, the first stirrings of a connection that might change both of their lives forever. The night air was cool, the stars shining bright over the hills and forests. The rancher lay in his bed, listening to the quiet breathing of the woman in the cot nearby, and he felt a strange mixture of peace and anticipation. Life had shifted, moved in a direction he had not imagined. And in the depths of his heart, he knew that this encounter, this chance meeting in the forest, was only the beginning of a story that would test them, challenge them, and ultimately bind them together in ways neither could yet understand. And so, the first chapter of their journey closed with the fire glowing softly in the hearth, the animals resting quietly in the barn, and the rancher and the woman, side by side in the cabin, facing a world full of uncertainty but also the quiet promise of hope. Days passed at the ranch, and the rancher and the Apache woman slowly settled into a rhythm together. The mornings began with the soft glow of sunrise spilling over the hills, and the rancher would rise to feed the animals while she prepared a small breakfast. She had a quiet grace about her, moving through the cabin and the yard with careful, purposeful steps. She carried herself with strength, yet there was a gentleness in the way she approached every task. Watching her, the rancher began to notice small details he had never paid attention to before. The way her hair caught the morning light, the steady patience in her hands as she milked the cows, the soft hum of a tune she sometimes sang as she worked. At first, their communication was limited. She spoke in a mix of broken English and her own Apache language, and the rancher struggled to understand her fully. But over time, words became less important than actions. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to trust the small gestures that indicated intent. When she carried water from the stream, he would make sure the path was clear. When he fixed a fence, she would bring nails or hold the wood steady. Their cooperation became seamless, almost instinctive, as if they had known each other far longer than a few weeks. One afternoon, the rancher noticed her staring at the horizon, a distant look in her eyes. He approached her carefully. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She turned to him and smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and determination. "My family," she said quietly. "The people I left behind, the ones I could not save." The rancher listened, understanding the weight of her words without needing details. He had lived alone for so long that he understood loss, the ache of a past that could not be undone. That evening, as they sat by the fire, the rancher shared stories of his own past. He told her about his parents, who had passed when he was young, and how he had learned to survive on his own. He spoke of the loneliness he had endured and the harsh lessons of life on the frontier. She listened attentively, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking questions. In those moments, a connection deepened between them, not just of necessity but of shared understanding. They were two people shaped by hardships, finding a fragile sense of trust in each other's presence. The woman began to take on more responsibilities around the ranch. She learned to handle the horses, feed the chickens, and mend the clothes that had been worn thin. The rancher taught her how to care for the land, how to identify plants and herbs that could be useful, and how to navigate the dangers that sometimes crept close to their homestead. She absorbed his instructions quickly, her eyes bright with curiosity and determination. He admired her resilience, the way she faced each challenge without complaint, and the intelligence she brought to every task. But life on the ranch was not only about work. They also shared moments of quiet leisure. On some evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. Sometimes they would speak, other times they would simply watch in silence, enjoying the peace that had settled around them. The rancher began to feel a warmth in her presence that he had not felt in years, a sense of comfort, companionship, and even a quiet joy that made the loneliness of his previous life seem distant. Despite the growing closeness, there were moments of tension. The woman sometimes grew restless, glancing toward the forest or listening intently to distant sounds. The rancher noticed her anxiety and understood that the outside world remained dangerous, that people might come looking for her at any time. He reassured her as best he could, offering protection and advice. In return, she taught him patience and awareness, reminding him that survival required not just strength, but caution and respect for the land around them. One day, while repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, the rancher injured his hand on a nail. The cut was not serious, but it bled and throbbed painfully. The woman reacted immediately, guiding him back to the cabin and cleaning the wound with water and herbs she had gathered. She tied a clean cloth around it and stayed with him until the pain eased. Watching her care for him, the rancher felt a deep sense of gratitude and a new awareness of his feelings toward her. He realized that her presence had become essential to his life, not just for companionship, but for the comfort, care, and understanding she brought into his world. As weeks turned into months, they shared more than work and safety. They shared stories, laughter, and small victories. The rancher would tell tales of his adventures as a boy, hunting and exploring the hills around the ranch. She would recount memories of her childhood in the Apache village, describing the traditions, celebrations, and daily life that had shaped her. They found amusement in the differences between their worlds, and yet a common humanity united them. The rancher realized that despite the dangers and the differences, they had found in each other a kind of family, a bond forged not by blood, but by circumstance, trust, and shared experience. One quiet morning, the woman approached him while he was tending the horses. She hesitated, then spoke with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "Rancher, I have something to tell you," she said softly. He looked up, sensing the seriousness in her tone, and nodded. She took a deep breath. I am with child." The rancher froze, his mind struggling to comprehend her words. Shock, fear, and awe mingled within him. This news changed everything. He had never anticipated fatherhood, and certainly not under such unexpected circumstances. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled through the trees outside, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The rancher felt a surge of emotions he could not name: responsibility, protectiveness, worry, and surprisingly, a deep sense of connection. He realized that the woman's trust in him, the bond they had formed, had led them to this moment. They would have to face the world together, protect the child, and navigate challenges neither of them had ever imagined. In the days that followed, they made plans. The rancher began thinking about how to prepare for the child, how to protect both the woman and the baby from the dangers that lurked outside the safety of the ranch. They discussed the future, sharing hopes and fears, and slowly the rancher began to understand the depth of his feelings for her. He realized that his life, once so solitary and predictable, had transformed into something far greater, a life filled with connection, responsibility, and love. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy and tenderness. The woman shared stories of her own family, of the bonds she had once cherished, and of the dreams she still held despite the hardships she had endured. The rancher listened, sometimes offering advice, sometimes simply providing a listening ear. Together, they laughed at small mishaps on the ranch, celebrated successes like mending a broken fence, and found solace in each other's presence. The rancher began to feel a sense of purpose that he had never known before, an understanding that life was no longer about solitude, but about connection, care, and shared survival. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they would sit together on the porch, speaking softly or simply watching the horizon. The rancher noticed that her presence had become a comfort, a reassurance that even in a world filled with uncertainty, they had each other. And she, in turn, found safety and stability in the rancher's care, discovering that trust and companionship could exist even in the harshest of circumstances. By the time the first season passed, the ranch had changed, not in structure but in spirit. The once lonely rancher now shared his life with someone who had become indispensable. They had created a small, fragile world of trust, care, and connection, a sanctuary in the midst of a dangerous and unpredictable frontier. And as the days continued to pass, both knew that the challenges ahead would be great, but so too would be the strength they could find together. The rancher had discovered something he had never expected, that life could surprise him, that connection and trust could emerge even from the most unlikely encounters. And in the woman, he saw not just a companion, but a partner, a friend, and soon, a mother to the child who would bind their lives forever. Together, they faced the future with hope, courage, and a growing understanding that their shared journey had only just begun. The news of the woman's pregnancy settled over the ranch like a quiet storm, changing the rhythm of every day. The rancher found himself thinking constantly about what it meant, not just for him but for her, and for the child she carried. Life, which had once seemed so simple and predictable, now felt full of new responsibilities. He realized that protecting the woman was no longer just about keeping her safe from the dangers outside. It was also about preparing for a new life, a future that neither of them had planned but could not ignore. At first, the rancher did not know how to act. He was filled with questions and concerns. How would they manage the work on the ranch with a child coming? Could he provide enough food, enough shelter, enough care? And then there was the world outside, the townsfolk who might disapprove, the hunters or militia who might seek to harm her, and the ever-present uncertainty of frontier life. He felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. Yet alongside that fear, there was a deep, unshakable sense of commitment. He would not abandon her. Not now, not ever. The woman noticed his concern and tried to ease it with quiet reassurances. She smiled softly, sometimes placing a hand over her belly, as if to remind both of them that life had a way of persisting even through hardship. She spoke gently to him, telling him that while the future was uncertain, they had each other, and that was the greatest strength they could possess. "We will find a way," she said one morning as the sun rose over the hills. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight of courage and determination that touched the rancher deeply. As the days passed, the rancher began to adjust to this new reality. He learned to plan ahead, thinking not just of the immediate tasks on the ranch, but of the needs of a growing family. He started to prepare the cabin for the arrival of the child, repairing worn sections of the floor, adding blankets, and creating a small area where the baby could be safe and warm. He also became more attentive to the woman's needs, noticing when she seemed tired or uncomfortable, and stepping in to help without hesitation. His days became busier, but also richer, filled with a sense of purpose he had never known in his solitary life. Despite the joy and anticipation, there were moments of doubt and tension. Sometimes, the woman would gaze toward the horizon, her expression distant, as if she were remembering the life she had left behind. The rancher would approach her quietly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but he knew that no words could erase the pain or fear she carried. He understood that her strength was both a shield and a burden. She was brave, but she had also endured much, and the thought of facing the unknown world with a child made her worry visibly. Together, they shared long conversations about their fears and hopes, learning to lean on one another in ways that went beyond mere survival. Life on the ranch began to take on new patterns. The rancher rose earlier to complete the chores before the woman became too tired, and she focused on lighter tasks that would not strain her. They spent quiet evenings planning for the future, gathering extra food, and discussing how they would raise the child in safety. The rancher even found himself telling stories to the woman, not just of his past, but of the child they would soon welcome into the world, imagining the laughter, the small milestones, and the moments of wonder that awaited them. These stories, simple as they were, brought comfort to both of them, a sense that the future could be bright despite the uncertainties. Yet the outside world continued to press against their fragile peace. The rancher knew that word of the woman's presence at the ranch could reach people who might not understand, people who might judge, threaten, or even try to harm them. He remained vigilant, watching the perimeter of the property and preparing for any potential danger. The woman, though wary, trusted him completely, following his guidance with quiet obedience. Together, they developed strategies for safety, quiet paths through the forest, careful timing of errands into town, and signals for danger that allowed them to respond quickly. In this shared vigilance, their bond grew even stronger. One morning, the woman fell ill. The rancher found her weak and shivering, and panic rose in his chest. He tended to her carefully, fetching water, preparing herbal remedies, and staying by her side. The fear that something might happen to her or the baby pressed heavily on him, but she reassured him, placing her hand over his and smiling faintly. "I am strong," she said softly. "The child is strong too." The rancher stayed by her side for hours, watching over her, feeling a deep, protective love he had never known before. In that moment, he realized that his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer just a solitary rancher. He was a guardian, a partner, and soon, a father. As the weeks went by, the woman's condition improved, and the rancher felt a renewed sense of hope. They continued their daily routines, but now every action was filled with consideration for the child. He repaired the barn to ensure safety, stocked extra food, and even began to craft small items that might one day be useful: a wooden cradle, tiny clothes, and other necessities. The rancher discovered that preparing for a new life was not just work. It was a way to imagine the future, to dream alongside the woman he had come to care for deeply. Their conversations deepened, touching on not only practical matters but also hopes and fears for the child they would raise. The woman spoke of her people, of the traditions she wanted to pass on, and the values she hoped the child would learn. The rancher shared his own ideals, the lessons of the land, and the importance of honesty, resilience, and respect. They realized that despite their different backgrounds, they shared a common desire to protect, nurture, and provide a life filled with love and safety. This understanding brought them closer, creating a foundation of trust and mutual respect that neither had expected when they first met. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, the woman approached the rancher with a thoughtful expression. "We must think about the world outside," she said softly. "People may not understand, and we must protect the child." The rancher nodded, understanding her concern. They spent hours discussing contingencies, planning for emergencies, and imagining different scenarios. It was not fear that guided them, but caution and care. Together, they faced the reality of the world while remaining steadfast in their commitment to each other and the life they were bringing into being. As the months progressed, the rancher noticed subtle changes in the woman. Her steps became slower, her eyes carried a softness he had not seen before, and she spoke often to the child growing within her. She would hum songs or tell stories as if the baby could understand every word. Watching her, the rancher felt a mixture of awe and tenderness. He realized that the bond between them was no longer just about survival or companionship. It was about family, about nurturing life, and about embracing a future filled with responsibility and love. Despite the challenges, they shared moments of joy. They laughed at small accidents, celebrated successes on the ranch, and found beauty in the simple routines of life. The rancher discovered that caring for another life, especially one as delicate and precious as the child, brought meaning and fulfillment he had never known. And the woman, in turn, found solace and strength in the rancher's unwavering support. Together, they became a team, each learning from the other, growing stronger, and preparing for the day the child would arrive. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, speaking softly about the future. They imagined the child taking its first steps, learning the land, and growing up surrounded by love and safety. The rancher often placed his hand over the woman's belly, feeling the small movements and marveling at the life developing inside her. In those moments, all the fears and uncertainties of the outside world seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet hope that whatever challenges lay ahead, they could face them together. By the time the first year of her pregnancy was well underway, the rancher understood the profound change that had taken place in his life. He was no longer just a man who lived alone on the frontier. He was a protector, a partner, and soon, a father. The presence of the woman and the child had transformed his perspective, teaching him patience, responsibility, and the depth of human connection. He realized that love and family could emerge even in the most unlikely circumstances, bringing purpose and meaning to a life that had once been defined by solitude and routine. And so, As the seasons shifted and the land around them continued its quiet rhythm, the rancher and the woman prepared for the future with hope and determination. Every day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new joys. And through it all, they faced the world together, bound by trust, courage, and the promise of a child who would forever change the course of their lives. The rancher had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life with the woman, yet he knew that peace was fragile. Each day brought new tasks, but also new worries. The outside world was unpredictable, and he could not ignore the possibility that someone might come searching for her. Rumors and whispers reached his ears from the nearby town, people asking questions, curious about the woman living on the ranch. Some were suspicious, some disapproving, and a few were outright hostile. The rancher understood that keeping her safe would require more than caution. It would require vigilance, quick thinking, and courage. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills and the first light of day spilled across the pasture, the rancher noticed movement along the tree line. At first, he thought it was an animal, but the figures were too deliberate, too human. He ducked behind the barn, peering carefully. A small group of men had approached the property, their expressions tense, their eyes scanning for signs of intrusion. They were strangers, but the rancher recognized the danger immediately. They were likely bounty hunters or settlers who had heard of the Apache woman and intended to remove her from the land. His heart raced, but his mind sharpened. He knew he had to act carefully to protect her and the child she carried. Inside the cabin, the woman had already sensed the tension. She had learned to read the subtle signs, the way he paused, the slight tightening of his jaw, the shift in his stance. She followed him silently as he explained the situation, their eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. Together, they devised a plan to protect themselves. The rancher would confront the men cautiously, keeping them at a distance, while the woman and the child remained hidden. They would rely on their knowledge of the land, the trails, the hidden paths, the cover provided by trees and rocks to keep safe. The encounter was tense but brief. The rancher met the men at the edge of the property, speaking in a calm but firm voice. He explained that the woman was under his protection, that she was not to be harmed or disturbed, and that any attempt to force her away would be met with resistance. The men, seeing the determination in his eyes and the strength in his posture, hesitated. There was a silent negotiation, a careful balancing of words and presence. Eventually, they retreated, leaving the ranch in temporary peace. But the incident served as a stark reminder. Danger could appear at any time, and the safety of the woman and the child was never guaranteed. In the days that followed, the rancher and the woman took extra precautions. They reinforced the barn, built hidden storage areas for food and supplies, and mapped out escape routes in case of emergency. The rancher trained himself to notice the smallest changes in the environment, the sound of footsteps in the distance, the glint of sunlight off metal, the shift of a shadow among the trees. The woman contributed her knowledge as well, teaching him subtle ways to remain unseen and unheard. Their cooperation deepened, and the trust between them grew stronger with each passing day. Despite the tension, there were moments of calm and joy. The woman's pregnancy progressed, and they began to prepare more intentionally for the child's arrival. The rancher carved a small cradle from wood, softening the edges and lining it with blankets. He collected clothing, making sure it was clean and warm, and gathered herbs and remedies that might be needed for the mother and child. The woman watched him work, sometimes guiding his hands, sometimes quietly offering suggestions. Together, they built not just a physical space for the baby, but a sense of readiness and hope for the life that would soon join them. They also shared moments of reflection. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange with the setting sun, the woman spoke of her fears. "I worry," she said softly, "for the child. The world outside is not kind to people like me, to people like us. I fear what may come. The rancher took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin and the life growing beneath it. "We will protect the child," he said firmly, "no matter what. Together, we are stronger than they think." She nodded, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her eyes. In that moment, they understood that their bond was no longer just about survival. It was about family, about the love and responsibility they shared. The seasons began to change. The air grew colder, and the first frost covered the grass in silver. Life on the ranch became harder in some ways. The animals needed more care, the firewood had to be gathered and stored, and the tasks that were once simple now required more effort. Yet the rancher and the woman faced each challenge together. They divided the work according to strength and energy, ensuring that neither was overburdened. They laughed at small mishaps, found creative solutions to problems, and celebrated even the smallest successes. The rancher realized that life, though unpredictable and sometimes harsh, was richer and fuller with her by his side. There were still difficult moments. The woman sometimes experienced discomfort and fatigue, and the rancher worried about her constantly. He learned to be patient, to offer support without complaint, and to adjust his own routines to accommodate her needs. He brought her water when she rested, helped her sit or lie down when she was tired, and spoke soothingly to ease her fears. He discovered that caring for another life, especially one so vulnerable, required more than physical effort. It required empathy, attentiveness, and unwavering presence. And he found that he was capable of giving all of that and more, driven by a love and responsibility he had never known before. As winter approached, the rancher became increasingly aware of the importance of preparation. He stored extra food, repaired the cabin thoroughly, and ensured that they had enough firewood to last through the cold months. The woman helped, guiding him to gather the right herbs, prepare nourishing meals, and maintain their health and strength. They shared quiet evenings by the fire, speaking softly of their plans, imagining the child's first cries, and dreaming of the future they hoped to build. The rancher felt a profound sense of purpose in these moments, knowing that every effort he made was a step toward safety, stability, and love. The outside world remained a looming concern. Occasionally, strangers passed near the ranch, their curious eyes lingering too long, their questions too pointed. The rancher remained vigilant, ready to confront any threat, and the woman remained cautious, teaching him the skills of alertness she had learned in her own life. Together, they formed a partnership built not only on trust and care, but also on mutual protection. They understood that survival required not just strength, but cooperation, intelligence, and foresight. Despite the hardships, there were times of quiet beauty that reminded them of why they persevered. The sight of the sunrise over the hills, the gentle snowfall covering the land, and the simple joy of a warm fire on a cold night. All these moments became symbols of hope. They celebrated the small victories: a fence repaired, a calf safely born, a well-stocked pantry. These were reminders that, even in a world filled with uncertainty, they could create stability and safety for themselves and the child they would soon welcome. As the months passed, the rancher and the woman became inseparable. Their partnership had evolved into a deep bond of love and mutual respect. They shared responsibilities, fears, hopes, and dreams. The rancher realized that his solitary life had been a preparation for this partnership, that every lesson of self-reliance, every hour of hard work, had equipped him to protect, nurture, and cherish the woman and the child. And the woman, in turn, found in him a steadfast protector, a companion, and a source of strength she could rely upon completely. The final weeks of the woman's pregnancy approached, and the rancher felt both excitement and anxiety. They knew the challenges of childbirth and the dangers that could arise in their isolated location. But they also knew that they had prepared as best they could, that their bond, their trust, and their courage would carry them through. They focused on the small, tangible tasks, cleaning the cabin thoroughly, organizing supplies, and ensuring that every corner of their home was ready for the new life. In doing so, they found comfort in their preparedness, a quiet assurance that they could face whatever came next. In those quiet winter evenings, as snow gently fell outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, the rancher and the woman reflected on how far they had come. From the moment he had discovered her wounded and alone in the forest, to this point where they awaited the birth of their child, their journey had been one of trust, courage, and love. They had faced dangers together, learned to rely on one another, and built a life that, though simple, was rich in meaning. And as they sat side by side, hands intertwined, they understood that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As a family, winter had deepened over the ranch, blanketing the hills and fields with a soft layer of snow. The air was crisp, and the quiet of the season wrapped the land in a stillness that was both beautiful and fragile. Inside the cabin, the rancher and the Apache woman prepared for the arrival of their child, hearts filled with a mixture of anticipation, hope, and the lingering anxiety of the unknown. Every small task felt significant, laying out blankets, arranging warm clothing, and ensuring that the firewood supply was abundant. Each action was a step toward welcoming new life into their world. The woman's strength amazed the rancher daily. Though her body was weary, she moved with determination and purpose, tending to small chores, preparing meals, and keeping watch over the animals. The rancher admired her courage, the quiet way she bore the burden of pregnancy while maintaining grace and focus. Yet he also recognized the moments when she struggled, and he stepped in without hesitation, offering support, care, and reassurance. Their partnership had grown beyond mere survival. It had become a relationship built on trust, compassion, and shared responsibility. One evening, the first signs came. The woman's breathing grew labored, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden table as a wave of pain passed over her. The rancher's heart leapt, and he rushed to her side. "It's time," he said gently, though his own voice trembled slightly with a mix of fear and excitement. He guided her carefully to the prepared area, arranging the blankets and making sure everything was within reach. His hands shook slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of the moment when life would change forever. The hours that followed were intense, filled with effort, concentration, and a mixture of anxiety and hope. The rancher stayed by her side constantly, offering words of encouragement, keeping her hands steady, and tending to her needs as best he could. He marveled at her strength, at the courage it took to bring life into the world under such challenging circumstances. And he realized that in this moment all the fears of the past months, the dangers outside, the uncertainty, the challenges of the frontier, melted away, leaving only the profound miracle of new life. As the night wore on, the rancher and the woman worked together, their actions perfectly coordinated despite the intensity of the situation. She guided him when he was needed, and he supported her with unwavering presence. Hours passed and the fire flickered, casting warm light across the cabin. Finally, after much effort, a cry pierced the stillness, a tiny, strong voice announcing the arrival of their child. Relief and joy washed over them both. The rancher held his breath, tears welling in his eyes as he gazed at the new life in his hands. The woman, exhausted but radiant, smiled, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of love and awe. The rancher cleaned and swaddled the baby, careful to follow the instructions the woman had whispered to him. They marveled at the small features, the delicate fingers, the tiny nose, the perfect little mouth. The child's eyes blinked slowly, taking in the world for the first time. In that moment, the rancher felt an overwhelming sense of purpose, a connection that surpassed everything he had known. He realized that his life had transformed completely. The solitude he had once cherished was replaced by responsibility, love, and the profound joy of family. In the days that followed, the cabin became a place of quiet wonder and careful routine. The woman rested, regaining her strength, while the rancher tended to the baby, learning to anticipate its needs and care for it with patience and attention. They shared tasks, supported each other, and marveled at the small milestones, the first feedings, the gentle movements, the tiny coos and cries that filled the cabin with sound. Each moment reinforced the bond between them, a bond built not only on love, but on shared experience, trust, and the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. Outside the cabin, the world continued its unpredictable rhythm. The rancher remained vigilant, watching for any sign of danger, ensuring that their family was protected from harm. The woman offered guidance, sharing her knowledge of the land, of signs and signals that might indicate approaching trouble. Together, they navigated the balance between caution and freedom, ensuring that the child could grow safely while they remained prepared for any challenge. The rancher understood that this life, once solitary, quiet, and predictable, was now full of responsibility, but also full of meaning, love, and hope. As the weeks passed, the rancher and the woman established a new rhythm of life. Mornings were filled with caring for the baby, tending to the animals, and preparing meals. Afternoons were quieter, spent resting, observing the snow-covered landscape, and reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. Evenings were their time for connection, sharing stories, laughter, and gentle conversations, while the fire cast a warm glow across the cabin. Each day was a blend of work, care, and joy, a life that, though simple, was rich in love and purpose. The rancher found himself transformed. He had learned patience, empathy, and the profound satisfaction of nurturing another life. He had discovered courage he did not know he possessed, and a capacity for love that reached beyond himself. He realized that the hardships of the past, the lonely days, the challenges of frontier life, had prepared him for this moment, had given him the strength to protect, cherish, and care for his new family. And he felt a deep gratitude for the woman who had brought not only a child into his life, but had also brought companionship, understanding, and a shared purpose. The woman, too, embraced her new role as mother, finding joy and fulfillment in the care of the baby. She spoke softly to the child, sang gentle songs, and shared stories of her own childhood and her people. She taught the rancher small traditions, little customs and practices that would help the child grow with a sense of identity and connection to both worlds. Together, they created a home filled with warmth, love, and safety, a sanctuary in the middle of the wild frontier. Though challenges remained, the harsh winter, the dangers beyond the ranch, and the uncertainties of the future, the rancher and the woman faced them together, strengthened by their bond and by the love they shared for their child. They had learned to trust one another completely, to rely on each other's strengths, and to face adversity with courage and determination. And in this shared strength, they found a peace that had once seemed impossible, a life where family, love, and hope outweighed fear, loneliness, and uncertainty. One bright morning, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, the rancher watched the woman holding their child near the edge of the property. The baby's small hands reached out, grasping at the air, and the woman laughed softly, a sound full of joy and relief. The rancher felt a swell of emotion, love, pride, and the knowledge that their lives had changed forever. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty together, and had emerged stronger, bonded not only by necessity but by choice, trust, and the miracle of life. In that moment, the rancher understood that the journey was not over. Life would continue to bring challenges, obstacles, and surprises. But now they had each other, and they had the child who had become the center of their world. Together, they would face the seasons, nurture the baby, and build a life full of love, connection, and resilience. The rancher felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path that had led him here, from a solitary man tending a quiet ranch to a protector, partner, and father. The days that followed were filled with quiet routines and small joys. The rancher learned to cradle the baby, soothe it when it cried, and marvel at the small movements that hinted at a personality yet to fully emerge. The woman rested and recovered her strength, guiding the rancher in ways that allowed them both to share the responsibilities of care. They laughed at small mishaps, celebrated tiny victories, and found joy in the simplest moments. The first smile, the first coo, the warmth of a fire on a cold evening. Together, they faced the world with hope and courage. The rancher's heart was no longer weighed down by solitude or uncertainty. It was filled with love, purpose, and a profound sense of connection. The woman, too, had found safety, companionship, and a life filled with meaning. And the child, innocent and new, represented a future full of possibility, a life born from courage, trust, and the unwavering bond between two people who had chosen to face the world together. In time, the ranch became more than just a place of work and survival. It became a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of resilience. The snow melted, revealing green pastures and the promise of spring. The rancher, the woman, and the child walked together through the land, learning, laughing, and living. They had faced adversity, danger, and uncertainty, yet emerged stronger, united, and full of hope. The story of their lives, a story that began with chance and necessity, had grown into a tale of love, courage, and the creation of family against all odds. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting golden light over the cabin and the fields, the rancher held the woman's hand, and the baby nestled in her arms. He realized fully and completely that their lives had been transformed forever. The challenges they had faced had been great, but the rewards, the love, the trust, and the new life they nurtured were greater. Together, they faced the future, not as solitary individuals, but as a family ready to embrace whatever the world might bring.